He has worked for the state of Minnesota's Department of Correction. He has been Youth Employment Coordinator of the Youth Development Project and Employment Coordinator of the Hennepin County Economic Opportunity Program, as well as Deputy Director of TCOIC. Mr. Pillow is on the Board of Directors of the WAY, the Governor's Commission on Law Enforcement, the Twin City Manpower Advisory Committee, the St. Paul Urban League, and belongs to the Minnesota Welfare Association. He is presently Director of the Hennepin County Economic Opportunity Program. Mr. Pillow, welcome to Augsburg College. I guess you'll attach this to yourself.
Oh, okay. Just go around my neck. Now, Coach, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. I've heard some splendid things about your wish to become involved from one of my staff members, Evan Anderson. I know he's planning on enrolling in the college out here in the fall, but as much time as he spends out here, I think he's already a student. I don't know whose hair he's getting into out here, but in my opinion, he's been doing some very constructive and needed things in the community, on the campuses, in behalf of disadvantaged persons. And I'm proud of him, and I'm proud of Augsburg College and its committed students who wish to get involved in the action. I'm also grateful for those red beans and rice and chicken and barbecue. You knew how to get me out here. As indicated in the introduction, I'm the director of the Hennepin County Office of Economic Opportunity. And basically, my responsibility is to attempt to mobilize the resources in our community to combat poverty. Now, some of the resources, just very briefly, that we attempt to bring into play are legal help, education, health, and manpower services. And I'll just touch very briefly on these before I move into the main gist of my subject. Now, how does legal services help the poor, and particularly the black community? The law, for many people in our society, is not an instrument of help, but it's an instrument of oppression. For example, for those who may not be acquainted with their legal rights, as many poor people and non-whites are, if you're not acquainted, your child can be expelled from school illegally, and it does happen. You may not receive the proper amount of welfare subsistence that your family is entitled to. You can lose your home or be evicted from it illegally, and this daily happens. You can lose your possessions. There are unscrupulous merchants who in our ghetto areas charge outrageous interest rates and take advantage of the poor people in these areas who cannot read or write. And then many times they end up paying for the merchandise many times over. And because of a drop in economic circumstances, they may miss a couple of payments, and then they have their refrigerator or washing machine or whatever other basic property that they have and need repossessed, primarily because of fraudulent merchants and unscrupulous merchants. So we've tried to bring the law in to help remedy that type of a condition that exists. And you can also lose your freedom, as many poor people, and particularly non-whites, do, where the dragnet comes along and will routinely pick up anybody that happens to be on the street on, quote, suspicion or vagrancy or these other catch-all that permits defenseless people to be swept up and to be taken downtown. And for per person, if you don't have the funds, in many cases you're powerless. But say even if for many people in our society, they may not be rich enough to have a lawyer, but if they're white or middle class, they may have contacts. They'll have a friend who misses them, or a husband, or a father, or some other acquaintance who knows somebody who can at least make an inquiry and to help keep the police and the courts and other forces like that on us. But if you're poor and non-white, many times these influences and funds are not available to you. And it does happen. It's happened to one of my staff members who was kept in jail 2 weeks because of mistaken identification. He could have lost his job. He could have lost his family, in addition to whatever respect and status he had acquired in the neighborhood. Of course, when he was freed, he was not guilty. Case of mistaken identification. Of course, he was able to keep his job with me, but for many employers, that would not have happened. So what we've attempted to do through the Office of Economic Opportunity is hire lawyers to represent the poor. And they have been able to win over 85% of their cases. 85% of their cases in behalf of poor and blacks. Now that's a lot of injustice. You may see it as a lot of victories, but that's a lot of injustice that's present in our community. Now why is it important that the law work fairly and impartially in behalf of all? Because that's the way you create respect for the law. Respect for the law is not created when the law works to oppress you. Respect for the law is created when it works in behalf of you. So we try to bring law into the black community and legal services into the black community, into the poor community, so they can be shown as an instrument of help, where so many times it operates as an instrument of oppression. Education. I think we will all agree that education is a vital beginning step on the economic ladder of success. But for many blacks, and some poor whites too, but particularly blacks because of segregated housing conditions, they do not have equal opportunities at education. So this is one of the reasons under the Office of Economic Opportunity, we've instituted a program called Head Start. Head Start basically is a program that attempts to take the child at preschool age, the age of 4 or 5, before he enters kindergarten, and give him a chance to catch up. Because the poor, the black children that come from these deprived neighborhoods, and I'm talking about deprived economically, not deprived culturally, because there's a whole lot of culture in those black communities. Many white people right here now are using it, but nevertheless, they come from homes in many of these communities where neither the father or the mother can read or write well. Many of the homes, there's nobody there but the mother. And as a result, there may be very little literature in these homes, very little written word, magazines, periodicals, and so forth. So the child does not get the exposure to the written word. The mother many times may have 5 or 6 children, so she's literally a prisoner in that house. And not being able to read or write well, she's fearful about venturing too far from the home. Somebody may point out the bus to her to catch, but she's confused and scared about where to get off. And as a consequence of her imprisonment and fear, the children many times seldom get over a block or 2 away from home. So that when they enter school and the teacher starts talking about the zoo, the bank, the department store, and these different things, the child does not know what she's talking about. And the teacher from her middle class background makes the mistake and comes up with the stereotypes that perhaps the child is lazy or he lacks motivation, or he's listless, or he's apathetic, or he's hostile. And the child is neither of these things. The child just doesn't know what the teacher's talking about because he hasn't been exposed to these things. So in Head Start, we attempt to take these children at an early age and expose them to the community. But we also found out that before we could teach these children, we had to feed them, because there are children starving right here in Minneapolis. It's just like they're starving in Mississippi. And so we had to not only begin to work with their heads, we had to start putting something in their stomachs. And so we instituted breakfast programs in our poor neighborhoods here in Minneapolis, and lunch programs through Head Start money. Because here again, the teachers were mistaking apathy and listlessness for a sign of disinterest on the part of the child. And basically the child was hungry. And I think you'll agree that there are all types of studies that have proven that brain power and food power are related. And so we found, even after we began to feed the children, we found that there was another step that had to be taken for our poor and our blacks here in Minneapolis. We found out that many of these children, because for economic reasons, had never been examined or seen by a doctor since the doctor patted them on their behind at birth. Never been to a dentist, and they had serious visual defects and so forth. And so here again, before they could learn, they had to have their physical defects taken care of. Many of them were suffering from malnutrition and so forth. There are very few doctors or dentists or clinics in the poor neighborhoods, the ghetto areas. And you have a mother there with 5 or 6 children, no husband in the house, no car. So consequently, when one of her children becomes sick, she has to wait almost until it's a crisis condition. And then she's got to haul all 4 or 5 down to the general hospital. And that becomes a day's ordeal, where she sits and waits to get treatment for one child. So as a consequence, she hesitates to go through that ordeal. And many times when she does go to get the treatment, the child should have been seen and treated a long time ago. And even at that, because of economic circumstances and the other things, she often delays getting any type of treatment for herself. And she's badly in need of this treatment, because here you have this one woman in the household. And so many times you hear so much criticism about AFDC mothers by other people who have never been in that position. And you should never criticize another person unless you've walked in that person's shoes, because you've got this woman there with 5 and 6 children, the only tree in that house, the only one there who's providing any nourishment for the children, the subsistence, the discipline, the teacher. She's everything without the benefit of any companionship on the part of another partner in that household. So as a consequence, the mother is not being treated well, and she has her physical defects. So before we could begin to teach the children, we had to treat them for their health defects. And we do this in the Head Start program. So in order to begin to educate and begin to teach some of the poor children, we had to start food programs to feed them. We had to bring in doctors to treat their physical defects, and dentists where they had never had any treatment for dental defects. We had to start providing glasses, because you can't learn, you can't read if you can't see. We had to start providing hearing aids, because if you can't hear the teacher, you can't absorb, and all of these other types of things, having nothing to do with lack of motivation on the part of the children or on the part of the parents, but all due to environmental defects and deficiencies that they were not receiving. And then another area that we've tried to instigate and that we pay a great deal of attention to through the poverty program is employment. And I think employment perhaps has been the most vicious means of discrimination against the black man that has existed in America. Because when you deprive a person of an equal opportunity to earn a living, then you're killing off his family. And in America, this is what has happened to the Negro male. Right here in the Twin Cities, 56% of the Negro males, regardless of their educational level, are working in service type or unskilled jobs. And it is not because they don't have the education, contrary to the myths that have grown up, because the educational level of the Negro in the Twin Cities area is only 8/10 of a grade level less than it is for his white counterpart. And this is because Minnesota ranks number 1 in the nation in the number of students that it retains in graduating from high school. And the Negro counterpart goes right along with that. As a matter of fact, many of the Negroes who come to Minnesota bring skills, particularly in terms of being able to work with their hands. They come from the South many times, where they were permitted to practice in the craft unions, though they didn't get the equal pay, or they weren't permitted to join the unions. It was the Negroes in many ways who built the South. And if you go south, in fact, just go south of Minneapolis, go south of the Twin Cities, you'll see non-whites working in many positions that you don't see them working here in the Twin Cities. And I'm not talking about top positions. I'm talking about such things as truck drivers. We've got more Negro teachers than we have male truck drivers. I'm not talking about the garbage truck or the trash truck. I'm talking about the big, well-paying truck drivers' jobs that would enable a male to take care of his family. Auto mechanics. How many service station, Negro service station attendants? We're still working here trying to break barriers in the hotel and restaurant industry so that Negro mothers can earn a few bucks in the evening, perhaps as a waitress, or a Negro girl going through college can pick up a few bucks in a restaurant as a waitress, or a Negro man shouldn't be just limited to working as a busboy or a dishwasher in the kitchen. There's no reason why he can't serve drinks as a bartender or be a maitre d' and all the other types of things. Look around in Minneapolis. Don't look at Mississippi. Look around in Minneapolis and ask questions as to why. We don't even have the excuse that some other states say that if you had all of our Negroes, you'd have problems too. We've got very few Negroes, and in many cases, we're treating them worse than in any other part of the country. I know in many ways this is hard for Minneapolis to believe, but these are the things I want to share with you. And this is why I'm coming to you to enlist your aid. For example, we've got a public school system here in Minneapolis that is one of 3 in the nation, one of 3 in the state, one of 3 school districts in the state that does not provide hot lunch programs for its elementary school children. And this is, again, I've already pointed out to you the need for many of these children to have food, where they're coming from homes where groceries are lacking or the diet is improper. But yet, because of the forces of status quo, and yet the food is available from the Department of Agriculture, we've been unable, and we need your help in this, to get the school board to institute hot lunch programs in the elementary schools in the poor areas that want it. We don't say citywide, but just in the poor areas that want it. The suburban schools have them, and we feel that if you want us, that it's better to start an easier way. It's more conducive to put food in somebody's belly if you want to be able to put something in their head. Now I want to share with you some things that I feel that you can address yourself to here in our society to help us have a better climate. And I think it is vital that you become involved. What are some of the things that you can zero in on here in our society in regard to racism that with your work and courage they could be overcome? 1, all of you need to insist through your actions on equal employment opportunities for non-whites. Now, it is not enough. There are many companies and many areas that put up the posters, but still the gap is growing between the non-white employment rate and the white employment rate. The situation is so that right now the high school graduate, a Negro, has a higher unemployment rate than the non-white high school dropout. And many times this is because that non-white high school graduate refuses to accept or stay on those traditional service jobs that are offered the non-white dropout, such as the busboy and the car wash. Go to the car washes sometimes. If you're ever looking for non-whites, you can find them there. I'll tell you another place you can find non-whites for sure. When you travel, and that's in the restrooms. How do you inspire a son from the commode room? I think you need to look at all the various governmental agencies, for example, both at the local level and at the state level and at the federal level. Go over to the state and see how many non-whites are employed in meaningful positions there. And I'm not talking about secretaries. Everybody's looking for secretaries. Many employers call, send me a pretty, brown-skinned, intelligent, attractive girl and I'll hire her. You know, I ask them, don't you want her to type? If you go over to the state, look in the State Department of Education. It's practically all white. And this is wrong, because then you've got people over there making decisions on a mixed populace, and they know very little about the mixed populace. And this is wrong in any area. When you've got only one class of citizens making all the decisions about another class of citizens. It's wrong primarily because our educational institutions, along with other institutions, have failed to tell all of us the truth. And I know others have hit on that with you today. We've got veterans, Negro veterans, returning from Vietnam to the same situation that they left. I've had 4 or 5 of them call my office. Some of them got 1 year, 2 years of college, and the doors are still not open. Now, they don't have skills, you know, but all white youth don't have skills. But what they do have is this. They've got motivation, they've got potential, and so what we're asking employers to do is to do the same thing that they do with white youth. Take this Negro veteran or this Negro young adult with this potential and ambition and train him on the job, the same thing that you do with white youth. A white youth comes out of high school, he hasn't got it all going, but somebody puts their arm around him. His father knows somebody, so he gets a job in sales, and everybody, they begin to groom him and polish him. And pretty soon, he's no longer that awkward green white kid that started. Well, this is the same thing that the Negro youth needs. There's no time to be looking for the instant Negroes or the super Negroes. We've had our Jackie Robinsons and Ralph Bunches, the same as white people. But all white people were not Jackie Robinsons and Ralph Bunches. And there was a place in the sun for them. And what we're demanding now is a place in the sun for the Negroes who have ambition and potential but haven't had the opportunity to either get the training or to have that channeled constructively. The kids that you read about that are claimed to be rioting and etc., these are the kids who have the most going in behalf of America. The only trouble is that you read it wrong. These are the kids who have not copped out. These are the kids who have the ambition and who are knocking on the door to be a part of America. The ones who have given up, for the most part, have either withdrawn. They're back in the shanty. It's when you no longer hear the cries for help that the times are the most dangerous. Those knocks on the door are not to knock the door down, but they're asking to let them in. And you cannot let them in just in time of war, as we're doing now. We ask them to do our fighting, and this is who is doing the fighting. It's the poor, the rich or the affluent, and the others talk about freedom, and you send the poor and the non-whites and the Appalachian whites to do the fighting for it. The Defense Department had a project called Project 100,000, whereby they took 100,000 poor youth of America. 60% of them non-white, 40% of them white. 60% of them could not read past the 6th grade. 14% of them could not read past the 3rd grade level. The Defense Department took them, and after a year of training, graduated 95% of these into combat over in Vietnam. Now, if we can train our poor and our disadvantaged for combat, for destruction, why can't we take those same poor here in America, those same non-whites, and train them for construction? You need to demand, I say demand, through pen and paper, that the poor of our country be fed. We're in a country right now where many millions of American citizens, black and white, are starving. And yet, because of our political system and vested interests, we pay wealthy farmers not to raise food, not to plant it. Not the poor farmers, because the poor farmers don't even get in on it. But you pay the wealthy farmers not to raise food or to store it. You pay them to store it, or you send it overseas. Almost anything rather than give it to your own. And you know why this is permitted? It's permitted because you sit out there and do nothing about it. It's been in the paper, you know. And what you need to do is get in touch with your we've got congressmen right here from Minnesota that vote against food aid for the poor in our country, right here in Minnesota. And you need to grab your pen and pencil and insist that this no longer continue. The House of Representatives just recently voted a large appropriation, and rather than have that money go to Mississippi and some of these other places to feed the people, you know what they did with it? They voted it for a study. Voted it for a study. Doctors have already been down there and have taken the pictures and come back. But any type of divergent means not to help people. And this is the type of people, some of the people that we have in our Congress. And they feel that they can get away with it because, quote, decent American white people do not react to this type of injustice. Now, we've got a few. We've got a few American white people, and particularly the young people who are saying, hell no, we're going to break out of this bag for America. And glory be to you. And don't let your adults put the clamps on you. Stick with it. And don't let the bigots scare you. Just like in any other time, it's always been a minority of people that have saved our country, that has brought about progress. It has never been the masses who have exhibited the leadership. And it's the same now, and it probably always will be. You need to insist on loans and grants to Negro businessmen. You go into some of the ghetto areas, and though the Negroes live there, everything owned there is white. The homes are owned by white absentee landlords who don't keep them up and who ignore the law, disrespect the law in terms of the housing violations, and yet they take the money out of that neighborhood and take it to the suburbs. The Negroes have a difficult time trying to get loans or any other types of things so that they can establish businesses in their own neighborhoods. The businesses are white-owned, the money goes out, and they don't make an investment in that neighborhood. Many of the Negro neighborhoods, the ghetto areas here in Minneapolis, I'm not talking about any place else, they're lacking in recreation facilities. There's no bowling alleys there, or shows, or swimming pools, and parks, and all of these types of things. Health clinics, and these other things. These things are absent and missing from the ghettos. No Negro proprietorship. And until people begin to have an opportunity to have some proprietorship where they live, then there's nothing there for them to save. And to get the loans and these other types of things, to get the jobs, they steadily have got to make this plea to the white person. And that's the thing that's so demeaning, his existence so many times in terms of what he can do to help himself. He's not asking for handouts. He doesn't want welfare. That's demeaning. All he wants is an opportunity to help himself. Basically, many times what he's asking is that you get out of his way. That's all. Get out of his way. Remove those discriminatory blocks. Clean up your mind. Get out of his way. And he can make it. You need to be prepared to participate in boycotts or other effective means to open up apprenticeship opportunities for Negroes. Now, we've been talking about for years the discrimination that occurs as a result of union practices. There's nothing new that the Negro has to say about that. He's said it all before, but it's permitted to continue. And you know why it's permitted to continue? Because there are politicians who owe their votes to the unions. There are officials in the various enforcement agencies who are beholden to certain vested interests in our society. And the, quote, decent people sit around and do nothing. So when the decent people do nothing, the forces of evil are always able to take over. And as a result, it's the blacks and other poor who pay. Got an example here just recently. It was in the paper that you read about, where this very qualified Negro man came here with the idea of trying to be hired as a maintenance supervisor. Had all the qualifications that could ever be needed. Able-bodied, the whole bit. Had all the credentials, letters of references. I met the man, talked to him. And company after equal opportunity company turned this Negro man down because he would have been put in a position of supervising whites. That was the only reason they turned him down. You know, they gave him all kinds of courteous reasons. But basically, and these are some of your well-known companies. You know, I'm not talking about the little fly-by-night company. I'm talking about these were companies with big equal opportunity posters. And the man was being turned down because he was competent enough to supervise whites, and he couldn't be hired doing that. This is the type of thing that is so damaging to Negro youth. It is no good to you. Does very little good to be talking education and all these other types of things and incentives to non-white youth if they can't look around in their community and see where their dad or their brother or their peer has achieved, particularly when he's already acquired the credentials. These are the things that your help is needed in, because the way it is, actually one white person's word is equal to 10 Negroes' words. That's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. So you've got to become involved. And I don't mean after the riot. After the riots occur, here come white people from suburbs and everything, cruising through the area. The only time they've been there. Negroes have been talking about the area, you know, for many times. You know, help us to establish some proprietorship in this area. Provide, you know, take away the employment barriers, you know. Provide us with the municipal services so that our streets can be cleaned and shoveled and the garbage picked up. And they fall on official deaf ears, both unofficial and official deaf ears. But as soon as a few windows are broken, the whites pour in on a sightseeing tour. You need to insist, and I think Augsburg is beginning to do this, that the colleges and universities open up meaningfully to non-whites. But it's not just enough to open up to non-whites. I think you've read the statistics in the paper where our northern colleges actually have a fewer percentage of non-whites in them than in our southern colleges. And yet it took the Supreme Court to open up the southern colleges. It is not just enough to open up the colleges to non-whites and provide them with scholarships and tutoring. That's okay, but you also need to look at some of your courses that you've got. Some of the courses that you have in college are totally unrelated to the world. And yet you go ahead, you know, you're still, you know, working on that same curriculum. Working on that same curriculum. You see what I'm talking about? You need to bring in some, you know, untraditional like students who can share with you the way the world out there is, so that you can begin to relate school to the world as it is and to the mixed population that exists out there. It doesn't mean that you got to scrap everything, but our colleges and educational institutions are in desperate need of revised curriculum. And there are some blacks without PhDs or MAs or BAs that could be of tremendous help to you in relating it to you. Because so many times your populace comes from one sector of society, and your teachers come from one sector of society. So where is the intrusion for additional learning? I think the other important thing about that, when you begin to revise some of your curriculum, you're going to find out that some of these blacks can star. They're going to be A students in some of these things that you don't know about. The only reason they're not A students is because you're only teaching one side of the picture. You're teaching your side of the picture. Open it up and learn something from them, and that way they'll have a chance to star too. Because many of you would be F students via ghetto knowledge, but yet the ghetto is a part of America, and there's some strong points in those ghettos, and there's some culture, and there's some language, and there's some savvy, and there's some moxie, and there's some strength. You need to support the black community's petition to the Urban Coalition that the City Council have some representatives from the black community, either through an advisory capacity or some other way. And also that black representatives be on all of the policy and planning boards of the city. And why is this important? I think I've touched on it before. Because in the cases the way it is now, you've got one side of the community making all the decisions about another side of the community that they know nothing about. And they know nothing about them because all of the institutions, the church, the school, business, and all the others, the media, have failed to tell the truth. So as a consequence, you can no longer rely just on white people to help Negroes. It's got to be done, and this is what the blacks are insisting on, that it be done shoulder to shoulder. No longer want the bit of one person standing up and the other one kneeling. You need to insist, for example, for openers at the Congress of the United States, appropriate money this summer to hire so that poor youth, black and white and red, can have jobs this summer. Right now, the only one who has passed such an appropriation is the Senate. The House of Representatives and Minnesota congressmen, there are Minnesota congressmen who are voting against it so that we can provide employment, decent employment opportunities for our youth this summer. They talk about all types of, riot prevention and all these other things, and it's terrible that it has to be talked about that way. But still, at no time do they want to provide appropriations so that blacks and reds and poor whites can work constructively and with dignity. No make-work jobs, no sweeping the streets, The kids don't want that, and the men don't want that. But basically what they want is an opportunity to earn a decent wage in a decent job and an opportunity to rise above that entry-level job. But so many white employers, because of the racism thinking that has occurred in our country, feel that it is just enough to offer any job to a non-white and that he should be forever grateful regardless of the pay and regardless of the dead-endness of it. You need to insist that the President of the United States speak out in support of positive programs in support of the appropriations. You need to insist that the President and all candidates for elected office support the Riot Commission report's recommendations without any equivocation, you see. They have no right to equivocate on the basic human rights of black people. You have no right to do this, but yet it's been done historically. You need to insist in the areas that you live that suburban schools hire non-white teachers. Now, it's tragic enough that the suburban schools, for the most part, are not integrated. Because here again, when you don't begin early in school to teach America as it really is, then this is why so many times white people grow up and become adults with the hang-ups that they have about our American society, and even more importantly, about the world in general. We're over there now, overseas, trying to deal with non-whites overseas, and we haven't been able to deal with them equitably and humanely here. So consequently, lacking knowledge, we use the bomb. You know, that's just like, you know, the big bully. He has no other weapon but the stick. Easier to use the stick than have to think it out. And do not accept the excuse that suburban schools would hire qualified non-white teachers if they could find them. There are qualified non-white teachers who have been applying to the suburban schools and have been turned down. And in the absence of not hiring the qualified non-white teacher, you can always bring in minority people as resource people and as consultants. And bring them in from a variety of occupations. Don't just bring in the Negro doctor, the Negro lawyer. He's not the total Negro community. Bring in the Negro mechanic, the Negro postman, and so forth, so that white children and white youth have an opportunity to meet some of the other population that is present here in America and can begin to find out for their own selves. And pay them when they come. Don't ask them out there gratis. You pay white consultants, pay them. You need to encourage your churches and other groups to adopt certain agencies or programs or families, non-white families, to help them through cash. Many times there is no substitute for cash. Many times people may be hungry or have emergency needs, or an agency may be struggling and need funds, and they need cash. Let's take the Way. The Way is an agency that many of you read about. Is located on the north side of Minneapolis. Now this agency gets calls from all over the state and from the suburbs and every place and out of state, you know, to come in and help educate them in regard to minority relations and human relations. And they're performing a great service. And they're dying. They're practically bankrupt because they don't have cash. They don't have cash. They don't have finance. They've got no source of funding. But yet all kinds of group call on the Way and the people who work there to help educate them. You have big colleges that get great big grants to study, you know, to set up programs on minority relations, and big grants, and they'll call in staff members from the Way or some other place and give them a pittance, and they provide the core of the instruction for the program to go on. And yet when the black agency applies to these same foundations, etc., for money so that they can help themselves, they will not give it to a black agency, but they'll give it to a white institution, you know, to set up a minority relations program that the minority people are the experts on, and they only get the pittance, you know, and all the rest goes to the whites. That's what I'm talking about. And that's paternalism, and that's racism, and that's a denial of an opportunity for blacks to help themselves based on their own professional competence and the expertise that they have in their area, and they can't even earn in that. As I stated, sometimes there's no substitute for cash. You should encourage both your churches and other groups and agencies to set up emergency contingency funds for hardship cases that black people and poor come across. Many times families are evicted from their home, and they're in need of emergency funds, and you just don't go downtown and apply for relief. And there are many poor people who would rather starve than be on relief. And that's not being lazy. That's a matter of pride. In addition to the fact that many times there are resident requirements and all the other bit that can work against people getting immediate help. An emergency contingency fund that people could get help with dignity They don't have to, tell how many freckles they got on their face and all that bit. Newly arrived families sometimes come in the city, and they come here primarily because they've read somewhere that that Minnesota is a land of opportunity. And unfortunately, when they get here, they find out it is not true. It's a beautiful country, and it's a hospitable country if you've got it made. They come here from the South many times, and they've already got the skills, coming as carpenters and electricians and so forth. As I said before, they were permitted to utilize that in the South, though they couldn't earn the same income, but they couldn't vote. So they come here to vote, and they can't work in their craft. So we convert the Negro carpenters and cement finishers into custodians. And you can imagine the effect that has on that man's family. In so many cases, this has led to the deterioration and breakup of the Negro male's family, because the Negro man not being able to support his family in line with what he has to contribute. And pretty soon the Negro women begin to turn on him. The aunts and the mother and the mother-in-laws and the sister. They begin to turn on that man. And pretty soon the children begin to lose respect for him. And as a consequence, pretty soon the man flees the home. And he flees the home not because he doesn't have love for his family. He flees many times out of love for his family and the fact that he can no longer stand and bear the loss of respect that he has from his family. This goes back to the days of slavery even, where many times the Negro man was forced to watch the white masters rape his mother or his wife, and he was helpless to do anything about it. And many times the white masters would beat the Negro male in front of his family, with a subsequent loss of esteem. And this has continued right on through to present-day America, where the Negro man is denied the opportunity to earn a living and provide a living for his family because of the barriers of discrimination. And you talk about respect for law and order and respect for the law. White people have never respected laws in regard to discrimination. There are all kinds of laws on the book that say thou shalt not discriminate, and you've never respected them. How integrated is your neighborhood, your school, the place where you work? Urban renewal. Urban renewal. That's probably one of the more vicious things that's practiced against black that exists in America, where they come with a bulldozer into the Negro neighborhood and crushing people's homes and their aspirations and their savings. And then they pile them all up into just one tiny pocket of that ghetto, because blacks don't have the opportunity to move anywhere in their society, and they didn't make the decision that the bulldozer should come in there. So they bring the bulldozer in there, and they cut that already crowded ghetto in half, which makes the Negro families then have to pile up together even more. And then they leave the land out there that desolate. It becomes a wasteland of weeds and trash, which leads to further deterioration in the neighborhood, which negates also the remaining residents' ability to get insurance, to get rehabilitative housing loans, to get mortgage and so forth. And then you add to that the unemployment situation and the fact that the Negroes cannot have proprietorship rights in that neighborhood, and the fact that the city does not come out and collect the garbage and the trash and clean the streets like it does in the more affluent neighborhoods. And then you toss 100-degree heat into that, and you've got 8 or 9 people living in 2 or 3 rooms, and you wonder why these areas explode. White people would never have permitted situations, would never permit America to impose those type of conditions on them. You revolted here in America just when you thought, when you thought you were going to be oppressed. You weren't oppressed. You just thought you were going to be. And you went out there and threw off those tea bags, and that was disrespect for property. That was not your property, those tea bags. You need to appoint citizens committees to visit municipal courts and jails, etc., to ensure and support justice for all, the low as well as the high, non-whites as well as whites. You see, you don't know anything about justice and law and order. Law and order rattles off so easily off of your tongues, as if it's an automatic thing. This is because many times you haven't been on the other end of that disrespect for law and order, like many non-whites have been for centuries in our society. Go visit, find out for yourself how the courts work, sometimes how the police work, how our system of American jurisprudence works, if you don't have the money or the contacts and so forth, and if you don't get tried by a jury of your peers. You don't get tried by them, you don't get sentenced by them, you don't get kept by them, and you don't get paroled by them. You need to involve yourself, in my opinion, with standing social action committees in combination with other groups to zero in on community injustices that arise. It doesn't mean that you take on the whole bag, but there's enough things that you can just read about in the paper or that minority people have been telling you about for years. If you'll just act on it, just one of them. Just take, any one of the things. And when you read about it, get some other concerned citizens and do something about it. Inquire about it, and zero in. You can be of tremendous help as a white person. There are many injustices that are routinely occurring in our society against American citizens, and particularly black people, and they have no one to turn to. No individual, no agency. Because the many agencies that are in our society, for the most part, are beholden to the status quo or to vested interests, or else they're self-seeking or self-serving. Non-whites know this, and as a result, many times they're powerless. They're powerless to use the constructive channels to get redress for their grievances. But it's also important on your social action committees that you accept only people who are committed and who are courageous. Don't go out, try to get some bigots and convert them. We don't have that kind of time. Get some people maybe who are not knowledgeable or maybe who are neutral, but don't even get them if they don't have guts. You see what I mean? This is what America needs, and this is what we're losing. I've already shown you that. Who do we send to do the fighting? We don't send a profile. We don't send a profile of America to do the fighting, do we? We send those who have the least to give the most. Even in the medieval times, it used to be considered that the people of affluence were the people who had the traits of valor. The forces of evil and injustice in our society are strong, and they've been permitted to become that way and deeply ingrained in our society and community because, quote, decent people seemingly haven't or hesitate to have the backbone, if I may paraphrase, to take arms against the sea of injustices and by opposing in them. And for example, I'm sure this has been cited to you before, but where were you years ago when they took that little 14-year-old Negro boy, two white men, and bashed him in the face, hung a big rock around his neck and throwed him in the river? A little boy by the name of Emmett Till, because they said he winked at a white woman. Not only was he acquitted, as all white people have been acquitted for murdering Negroes in the South, but they were able to sell their story to Look magazine describing how they did it, and they were paid for it. And the same about 4 little girls who were bombed in the Lord's Temple in Birmingham, whose only sin was that they were black. And Negro homes and churches continue to be bombed and burned. There have been times when there have been as many as 100 Negro churches burned in a month. And many times this is the only property that Negroes have or been permitted to have. You know, and where is your respect for property then? Where is your respect for life? I heard no cries about law and order when these things are occurring, and they're routinely occurring. Every once in a while now, when they start looking for somebody in the South, they'll turn up a couple of Negro bodies out of the river. Been missing. Some white kids had a lark, killed some Negroes with impunity. There has never been a white man convicted for murdering a Negro in the South. The closest they ever came to was conspiracy for civil rights. Now, isn't that a mockery? You see? Where is the respect for law and order by whites? When you can bomb and burn Negroes' property, when you can kill them with impunity, you can rape their women with impunity, you can discriminate against them contrary to the law, where is the respect for law and order? If we perhaps had some respect for law and order and the injustices that were occurring against some of our citizens of a different hue then, it's possible that a man of peace by the name of King might still be alive. Also a man of inspiration and vision by the name of Kennedy. 2 fine American seeds wasted because, quote, decent people condoned through their inaction a climate of ill will and disrespect for life and property towards many American citizens of a different hue to prevail in our country. The President of the United States must sneak into American cities as if he's entering foreign soil. Secret agents swarming like ants everywhere. Sneak into American cities as if he's entering foreign soil instead of the land of the free and the brave. Even in combat, there's a demilitarized zone that is safe to enter. But we have run out of zones and time here in America. The time for mourning is over. Now again, as ever before, is the time for movement. The movement against evil and injustice, poverty and prejudice, to ensure that all Americans have an opportunity to have a stake with dignity in our society, or there will be less stake for us all. Thank you.